Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, we are talking about Microsoft's one version policy for Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, how it has recently changed, and what it means for customers who must adapt to the stricter rules and short testing windows. As my guest, Sune Engsig, field CTO at Leapwork, explains, manual testing against regressions in D365 can take its toll on an organization, adding time and cost, and preventing them from investing in rolling out new improvements and solutions. Leapwork is the sponsor of this episode, and Sune recaps a recent webcast he presented to the MSDW audience and how the findings he shared translate into specific decisions for clients and their partners. We also discuss how Leapwork thinks about the shared responsibility between D365 functional testers and technical resources, the importance of automation in quality assurance overall, and implications for organizations that have embraced Agile. Okay, well, hi, Sune. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
I thought we could just start by asking you to give a bit of an introduction about yourself and what you do at Leapwork.
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Sune Engsig. I am field CTO here in Leapwork. Joined the company in 2018. So been around most of the things to do and functions here in this company, and very happy now to be in a very sort of direct and one-to-one conversation with our leading accounts and, sharing the gospel and our vision on how to secure quality across business processes.
All right, excellent. Well, we're here to talk about Dynamics 365, the finance and operations suite of products, and the one version policy or the one version approach that they've taken. And it's something that, as I understand, you've become quite familiar with in recent times. You presented for our audience recently.
Yeah.
And I thought we could start there with a bit of just understanding from you of what you know about one version, its history, and how you see it sort of impacting Dynamics 365 F&O users today.
Absolutely. And obviously important to say that, because that could be very well be a question from the listeners, right? Say, hey, one version is not new. It's been around for a while. I think the trajectory that is interesting to discuss here is to say that, Microsoft as being that, great, responsible and committed vendor for these clients, sort of saying, hey guys, we have this agenda of one version. We need to get you guys up and running on latest and greatest. And we acknowledge that, you need support in order to get to the situation where that goal is realistic. Because the fact of the matter is, for a lot of the clients out there, these recurring updates, these recurring changes in a production environment is something that is, if not keeping them awake at night, then certainly giving a little twitch at the eye. Because of course, if they were coming from on-prem based ERP, you would avoid changes. You would only do them if you absolutely had to, because, ERP is at the center of the spider's web, right? So if you just twitch the web in one of directions, right? Something will twinkle along with it, right? So what happens when you introduce changes on such a scale and such a business critical system as Dynamics 365 F&O? As a customer, that's some of the pain points and that's some of the worries and concerns that, have been struggling with finding a satisfactory response to up until this point, where Microsoft sort of went out and say, hey guys, we think we've got the way forward for this. And one of the crucial recognitions that was part of that was obviously realizing, and that's why I say that they're such a great vendor, realizing that their investment in quality, goes beyond Dynamics 365. They realize that, once you've made that investment and commitment as a client into Dynamics 365, you've placed that bet on having that absolutely fundamental central business supporting system. But you're also saying, I'm a big organization and I have a lot of stuff going on and it's not all running on Dynamics 365. And at the end of the day, for me to go and say, I'm ready for the next feature update, I'm happy to take it, I need to have that validation in place across the board and not just on my Dynamics 365 solution. I think that's one of the key changes in that mindset of saying, how should we work together on resolving and preparing and have that satisfactory relationship, if you will, with one version as a customer? Well, it means that you can validate your business processes end to end. Doesn't matter if it's coincidentally running on something else, because that's the reality when you talk to our customers, right? Our shared customers. It's that, yes, I have Dynamics 365. Yes, it's super important but I also have, and then the list starts, right?
Yeah, I guess one particular thing we should probably touch on here, I think if you're a finance or supply chain management customer already, you may know this, but it's probably worth reiterating, or if you're just learning about the product. Some of the deadlines and some of the approaches that Microsoft's using are changing, right? The dates and the timing. Can you talk a little about that?
I think the most important change, and these are very recent, these happened in February this year. I think one of the most important events is that you used to have the ability to skip 3 updates from Microsoft, and you're now down to 1. But then also Microsoft is changing the number of releases per year. So it doesn't sort of effectively, you're still looking into at least 2 main updates per year, but you get a longer service window on those running updates. So you get, it's a give and take situation. So yes, it goes down to 1, but then you have a little longer in order to get ready for it in terms of both the maintenance part, but obviously also incorporating the changes. You get a little longer time for testing, but obviously also at the same time looking into richer releases coming, going from 7.2 to 4, right? So I guess the long story short, Microsoft is saying we're doing these changes and we are accommodating some of those concerns that you've shared in the past, but it's not going away. This lifecycle management and the requirements it presents to your release management process and how you need to be ready for this, that's here to stay. So that, fundamental agenda is essentially the same. And obviously, again, from the client's perspective, what it boils down to is that you have these updates, be they feature updates, be they the PQUs, which are not going anywhere, remain as they have been for quite some time now, monthly, unskippable. So it's an urgent agenda for sure. And, from my perspective, I think, again, I want to give kudos to Microsoft for the way that they're embracing this and helping the customers to rise up for this challenge.
I know that in the past, I want to look in the history a little bit here. So, looking fairly far back in the past, Microsoft had developed RSAT, regression testing suite, essentially. It still exists, right? But it's not something that has a real future, right? What are some of the limitations? Where's that at today?
Whether or not it has a future or not, that's of course entirely on Microsoft's side of the fence. But I think it's a very good example of that storyline that I'm pitching here, right? Microsoft sort of saying, hey guys, this quality issue, yes, it's Dynamics 365, but it's also beyond. And obviously, as we all know, RSAT is exclusively supporting tests inside Dynamics 365 F&O. So not even inside the entire Dynamics ecosystem. And, that was one of the things that they were very clear on in the conversation, saying we need to do something about that particular problem. From our perspective, obviously, we acknowledge the fact that, you may have already made some significant investments into RSAT and it's currently serving its purpose and how to manage this transition, because I'm also very convinced that you're also feeling the maintenance challenge from RSAT. And so we're very happy to provide this ability of effectively migrating out of RSAT and directly into Leapwork, so that those investments made, they don't just explode and fade away, so to speak. They can carry on and continue to deliver value. And we also offer, of course, services in terms of having pre-built standardized end-to-end processes already in Leapwork, so that you may apply those and adjust those to those running processes. So whether or not you want to do that migration out of RSAT, or you want to say, here's a bunch of flows that covers my business pretty well with some little tweaks and tunes to it, that's something that is perfectly up for conversation, right? And first and foremost, finding that approach ahead that makes sense to you.
As you've learned more about D365 customers and what their needs are for testing, what have you learned about the impact of testing on these customers and how it impacts their business goals, how it impacts the value of their investment in ERP?
That's a good question. I think we're seeing a beginning, a maturing group of clients on SaaS services. And what I mean with that is, so as I mentioned, I've been with Leapwork since 2018. And back then, this whole idea of testing on SaaS was sort of a quaint conversation, because the customer would go, I don't really need to test it because, I'm getting it from the vendor and it's already all tested. And it would be early implementations of different types of SaaS solutions maybe. So they didn't really necessarily feel any pain associated with executing this particular SaaS service. But as we then has progressed now, and these organizations have matured a lot, It's not just one SaaS service, it's multiple, and they're integrated into each other, and there's complexity all over the place from that integration, from different lifecycle regimes. I mean, we're talking one version here. When we look at the other players out there, they have their approach to this with changing number of events over the year. And obviously from a customer's perspective, it all just piles up. So we have a very different conversation with the customers today compared to, only 4 or 5 years ago in terms of testing standard software, in terms of embracing and understanding the importance and impact of validation of business processes, as opposed to which might be a typical starting point when we talk about test automation. People tends to think about, this is about automating applications or software that I build. But effectively, from our perspective, because we have this very, very clear focus on processes, this particular story of talking about standardized software that's been niched together and, work in a unison from your particular business perspective, that's the type of activities that we home in on, because we're all about keeping the lights on and giving you that sort of comfort that those end-to-end business processes that they are running. Now, what happens under the hood, of course, is important when you receive that update and, reading through the documentation, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, when you receive that Microsoft update, the essential answer that you need to get updated is whether or not the stuff that you had yesterday continues to work, right? And that's the answer that we want to provide them with.
Do your customers sort of already draw the connection between testing and their testing needs and their business goals that they're trying to achieve with their business software?
Well, I would answer it this way. A lot of them is starting to see how doing it manually is impeding them from getting there.
So they're feeling that pain.
Yeah. So they're feeling the pain. It's a slightly different story. They're not sort of talking about QA, and obviously that's why I'm on podcasts such like this, right? And talk about, hey, you should really look into QA automation and process verification on demand. You should definitely see that as an absolutely fundamental business enabler, and frame it in that particular type of context. And for sure, I think we're moving in very clearly in that direction. But the fact of the matter is, looking at a lot of our clients, looking at a lot of our prospects, they're coming from manual. I mean, they're not coming from RSAT. They're coming from manual testing. So that's, they're on the start of a journey. And I know from experience that talking to clients on manual today, taking that leap, no pun intended, into having automated QA, I mean, it can be quite a tall order for the imagination. It's something that you actually have to experience in order to sort of fully grasp what the impact of this change in your delivery pipeline, what it does for you. So what we typically see, we onboard clients and we have that conversation and they go, oh, that sounds nice. And then they call us back in, 3 to 6 months and say, could you please tell some more about that? Because we're seeing some benefits and some impacts here that we didn't foresee in terms of how we can do these things. And obviously we're very happy to help them with those conversations.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'd be very curious to learn more about in that area is how you see organizationally, and I know it's probably not the same for every company, but how you see organizations dividing up or assigning those responsibilities between functional testing roles on this ongoing basis versus what typically developers or the IT team is asked to be responsible for.
Good question. I think when I discuss this in different opportunities and contexts, what I really try to emphasize is that, yes, I'm coming from the process perspective, but QA is, so much a collaborative effort. So you will never be in a situation where you will hear me going and say, right, you should just get rid of those developers, right? Stop talking to them for your testing and QA needs. Absolutely not. Because, even in those organizations with matured SaaS deployments, right, there's a bunch of people, making things work end to end. And that's the part of your overall QA perspective. But what we have seen in the past is that it's been on the terms of the IT people, right? So the types of testing that they would do, the types of testing they would make available for the business would be very, unaccessible for the business, which meant that you would find, your business users on the Dynamics platform, they would be, when talking about automation, it would typically be in the shape of simply handing over requirements, right? Any other software development activity. And so you would take any speed and momentum that you would have, all of those prospects and those potentials would sort of seep out of it really from the get-go. And so many situations we've seen, where customers have been disappointed on those investments and the results coming out of those initial endeavors on automation simply coming from the fact that they've underestimated getting it up and running, but more normally underestimating just how much it takes to keep it running. Because what they tend to forget is that, yes, it's automation, but it's automation in your QA environment. And the one thing that you can count on in QA is that things are changing. And so you need to have automation capabilities that can match that pace of change, that pace of evolution. And, just to me, it just makes so much sense to just say the ones who knows what changes are expected to come and what the end-to-end impact of this change should look like are typically sitting on the business side, right? The developer side are working on their very specific little things, but it's usually the business-driven people with that oversight and that overview. And up until now, we've not been giving them the proper means to convert that insight into automated QA.
So I want to shift gears just a bit. I suppose it's still tied to some of your previous points, but when you talk about Dynamics 365 solutions, there's very often for the customer, there's very often a partner engaged in helping them launch a solution, helping them maintain it, helping them enhance it over time. Can you talk about how Leapwork engages with the community from both the user side and the partner side in the Microsoft ecosystem?
Absolutely. So we recommend that if you're not working closely together with someone already, then you should definitely start to do that simply from the realities of working in this lifecycle regime, such as one version. So we try to work together with close partners who shares our vision. And that's an important point because obviously this whole new, at least from my perspective, this perspective of quality assurance based from a business process and a business continuity verification perspective, from your typical partner might be the one sort of saying, hey, I will take responsibility for this and this and that. And now we're sort of enabling a conversation where we can more have a talk of saying, hey, we can actually collaborate on ensuring a complete end-to-end verification and a complete understanding from your organization's perspective in terms of where your capabilities are and where the continuity is in light of the next update from Microsoft. And as a partner, I'd love to help you to do that. The partners that are on board to that vision are the ones that, we're working closely together with to, create these successes, be it in the shape of implementation projects for the ones on the journey towards cloud, or be it the ones now ramping up to get much more in control in the one version situation. It's the same essential story.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to that, as you've developed partnerships with Microsoft partner organizations, are there partners that come to their F&O clients with sort of Leapwork, technical expertise, knowledge of automation that they can sort of build into projects as they're ramping up with a customer?
Absolutely. And, talk to any QA lead, they can go for hours in terms of just how big this domain is, right? So building the strategy, how does automation strategy looks like? What is it that I expect to achieve from it? And what are the most important things that I need to have this continuous on-demand ability when it comes to quality assurance? Long story short, before you even consider plugging in any tool, those are the types of conversations that you should have. And, I know from experience that agenda, and I also talked about just, a couple of minutes ago, how that change can sometimes be so big so that, they can't really tell in advance. And in those situations, it's a great advantage for you to have somebody on your side to, accompany on you on that journey and help you to prepare for those benefits, but obviously also those changes that an automated pipeline will deliver to you, because obviously it's going to be a different way of working. The worst thing you can do, and that's where the partners come in and say, don't start there, is just to take your manual test cases and, plug them in. That's usually a very bad idea. So you can see before you even go into tooling or platform mode or whatever you want to call it, there's some conversations to be had with some skilled experts on not just QA, but automated QA. And again, that's of course the value that these partners bring.
Yeah, it's really an interesting time, I guess, in the evolution of F&O, because it's now so much more integrated with the Power Platform story. They've adopted this updated one version set of policies, as you've already discussed, for reasons that have evolved over time. It's not just out of nowhere. And then at the same time, the other element that I'm very interested in these days, just in my own opinion, is we're in a time where many D365 customers have now they've lived with the product for several years in some cases, going back, to 2020 or definitely earlier. And they've developed either, like you said, a robust set of maybe manual processes that they're living with or an older technology. And so many companies are going to be sort of reevaluating what works and what doesn't work for them as they plot the future. So this is I think it's a great time to have this conversation. I appreciate you being here for it.
Absolutely. And as you say, if you look at it from that perspective of how things are changing, right? So this has been on the horizon for quite some time. And if you look at it from that perspective, looking at how organizations have spent the last decade, if not more, on switching to agile, right? And not successfully have embraced the whole testing thing. The point that I was making previously with how IT would make testing approaches, testing platforms, etc., available, and they would all have that thing in common that they would not really speak the business language. So you would effectively, demote the business users from a testing context and saying, hey, you don't have any part to play in automation. And I think what we see is that having excluded this, in my perspective, core staff part of QA, the ones understanding the business and understanding what does good look like and how does verification of it look like, excluding them from the automation conversation has a high cost for some of these organizations, especially the ones now finding themselves in one version, or be it seasonal updates from Salesforce or whoever it is, because obviously they now understand that there is a momentum, there is a speed with which things will occur. That is a part of the SaaS DNA. And it's basically taken for granted that automation and that efficiency and the speed that we sort of get from thinking agile, that incorporates automated or QA as well, where the fact is that in many, many organizations working with agile, yes, they're delivering agile, but they're still validating and testing it manually. So you still have this brick wall of testing at the end of a very fast moving delivery train, which of course at the end of the day means that the speed that you pick up is not what you expected it to be. So what I'm getting at is that conversation has been brooding for a while. And I guess we were one of the first ones to sort of really go all in on saying we need to have it on terms with the business users. We need to figure out a way where we incorporate them, where we say, you're not just a part of the knowledge base, you're a part of the active working continuous solution of getting automated QA up and running. And I think that's what we see as the next step in that motion.
Yeah, very interesting. Perhaps a good topic for us to revisit in the future. I'd love to hear sort of how things continue to evolve in the space from your perspective.
For sure.
But thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Jason.
This has been another episode of the MSTW podcast. My thanks once again to Sune for joining me. And this message from Leapwork: to learn more about Leapwork, watch their recent webcast here and schedule a time with one of their test automation experts. We will put links to both their contact form and the webcast recording in our show notes. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email, jason@msdynamicsworld.com. For all of our updates, please do follow us on social media. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.